Well, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar from wherever you may be beaming in. If you can introduce yourself via the chat box and where you're beaming in from, that'd be fantastic as well. This session is being recorded, and the recording will be made available to anyone who wants to access that down the track and through the website. Feel free to interact through that chat box. I'm sure you're all aware of how this works by now. We've been doing it for a little while, haven't we? But before we go any further, I'd like to acknowledge country. I'm on Ngunnawal and Ngambri country here, based in Canberra, but wherever you may be sitting, standing, or out in a paddock, or whatever you happen to be doing, I'd like to acknowledge the people of that country, pay my respects to their old people and their current and future generations. So we just want to acknowledge all of those people before we start. Pardon me. Well, it's exciting to be involved today. It's the first in a series of 8 webinar sessions that we'll be running in relation to the Drought Resilience Leaders Program. Just to give a quick overview, the Drought Resilience Leaders Program is being funded by the Future Drought Fund through the Commonwealth Government. And it's a really important, our part of that program is a really important recognition that when we're talking about drought and drought resilience, we know what happens on farm, we know innovation, technology, and all these sorts of things will play a significant part in how we adapt to life and change that is brought about by drought and other natural disasters. It's also a recognition that people, communities, the relationships between those people, and leadership is also essential if we're going to build greater resilience in the face of change in the future. This is a huge part of why the Australian Rural Leadership Foundation is involved in this work. We've been involved in leadership development for almost 30 years, and we know that there's a really strong relationship between resilience in communities and the networked leadership in those communities. So it's a huge part of why we're involved in this particular work, and it's thanks to the Commonwealth and the Future Drought Fund that we're able to be involved in this sort of work. So just wanted to set the scene there. Firstly, I'd like to go around the Brady Bunch here and just welcome our speakers. I'm going to ask them to do a quick introduction of themselves, and then we'll get going. So, Anika, would you like to start?
Absolutely, and it's such a pleasure to be here with you all today. So my name is Anika Molesworth, and I'm based in far western New South Wales on the beautiful red sand lands of Willakali country, and I'm based on my family's sheep and goat property out here. Thanks, Matt.
Thanks, Anika. Simon, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, thanks, Matthew. I farm with my wife, Cindy Stevens, and 3 kids at Corrigan, which is about 250 k's east of Perth in the central wheat belt. We grow broadacre crops and run cattle and sheep as well.
Fantastic. Thanks, Simon. And Angus, we'd love to hear from you as well.
Yeah, thanks, Matt. I'm a beef farmer from central west New South Wales, Coonabarabran, centre of the universe. And look, I'm the chair of the National Farmers Federation Sustainable Development Committee, and so yeah, we've got a really active program in active interest in this particular program. So thanks for having us along.
No, it's a pleasure to all of you, and thanks very much for taking the time to join us today. I want to start just with some reflections from each of you about your own experience with drought. We know that the drought can be a very personal experience in that perhaps no two people experience it in the same way. And we also know that it's a collective experience because no one in the end is experiencing it alone. But why don't we start there? It'd be great to understand what it looks like from each of your perspectives or your own experiences with drought before we move on. Simon, I'm going to start with you. So out in the wheat belt in WA, we know there's like everywhere, there's been ups and downs. It's looking pretty good at the moment from what I understand, but tell me what that's looked like from your perspective.
Yeah, I suppose I've got a slightly different journey in the fact that I grew up in the city, although this is changing nowadays, and I married my wife, who's from a family farm. We both studied agriculture science together. So that sort of changed my idea of how I looked at farming. We had a very good year in our first year in 2003. I had worked as an agronomist prior to that. And I must admit, after 2003, I sort of thought, I thought about farming and how difficult it really was. But it was those subsequent years leading up to 2010, which was our driest season on record by 30%. I really began to understand the volatility in farming and the fact that every now and again you'll get these really dry years, which made me look a bit closer into our local trends. And looking at that, I realised that we are actually losing rainfall, and we've lost 20% of our rainfall since the year 2000. So not only were we dealing with climate variability, but we were dealing with a new normal. So that really focused our response in terms of the sort of techniques and innovation that we took on to respond to that.
Yeah, thanks, Simon. And tell us a little bit more about that adaptation to change. So, how have you managed that, and how much of that do you think is, I guess, for want of a better term, some short-term fixes versus some long-term thinking, changes in thinking?
Yeah, I suppose I've been farming for 18 years now. I could probably divide my career up into 3 separate sort of stages. Being an agronomist, initially I was very technically focused, and we both studied agriculture science as well. And Cindy was more focused on child rearing at that point, but then also did a dip head and was teaching secondary science. So I was sort of operating on my own. So that was the first part, and I was involved with my local grower group and trying to respond with sort of technical applications, but still having some really tough years and weren't getting ahead financially. And then it sort of changed to the succession period, where we started to work a bit closer together and started to think a bit more strategically about our business, and perhaps a little less focus on the technical side. In terms of the technical side, it was very much focused on how to grow crops with less rain, but also managing the frost risk as well. So if I sort of skip forward to present day, now we're very much a team. We have a much more strategic approach to things, perhaps a little less technical, a bit more simpler system. And looking to diversify our business as well. We brought livestock back in. We weren't just solely focused on cropping.
Great, Simon. Thanks for sharing that. That's great. Angus, we're going to zoom across to, I'm going to say central west, but Coonabarabran's heading more west and central in New South Wales. And we'd love to hear about your own experiences. And I note just you were talking about in those different perspectives in terms of your own farm, and then, you're obviously chairing sustainability committee as well. So thinking about that broader picture.
Yeah, thanks, Matt. And so Dad bought this place in 1957, so we've been here a while. Which again, Dad passed away a few years ago. The linkage to here, I'd have to say, he said, mate, if you can get a good price, sell it. Like that's it. That was his attitude to the farm. So we certainly we haven't got that deep link which some people have. We've probably, like if we could find a better opportunity, we're prepared to go. And so yeah, I worked off farm for quite a while, and then had the opportunity to come back. We sort of made the decision to come back onto the farm. We bought a farm in 2002, just prior to that. Now that was the shocking. Now we weren't here on the farm at that stage. We bought it. We were working away. Bought the farm. It didn't rain for 6 months. Didn't go through, I'd have to tell you, I didn't really go through the drought like I did this year. This is the first drought, major, serious drought I've gone through, which has been some really eye-opening things for me. An uncle of mine that lives not too far away from me, he said, there's 2 things about drought. There's 2 things you can't run out of, and that's water and money, access to money. He said, if you run out of either of those, you're gone. If you own cattle, run out of water, you got to shift them. And if you run out of money, you're going to shift them. And if you're shifting them during the middle of a dry, you are going to suffer some serious pain. And so that was always a real focus of mine. The two things I could never run out of was access to money and water. So getting back to it, look, the lesson I've learned, I'd have to tell you, is forget looking at other people, look at yourself, make decisions that you're comfortable with, right? Now, our decisions here, we sold 2/3 of our stock. 2/3 of our breeding cows, they went. They just had to go. We put some on adjustment, but eventually that ran out. So we brought some of them home and sold some. We kept them in good condition, so we never had a fire sale. We never had to give them away. You know, I think we averaged, again, not Scotty, I think we averaged about $1,200 for these cows just as a fat cow, like during the worst of the drought. So they were in really very good condition because we sold them. But don't look at other people. Make some decisions about yourself. Make some plans, like really very basic plans, like really, really basic plans to say, right, this is what I'm going to do. In our case, we said we're going to sell 2/3, we're going to keep 1/3 of our young core breeders, and we're going to feed them and we're going to see this out. And so that's what we did. We just always knew that we could do that. And that was a decision I came to because, again, I have a zero policy with animal suffering. If I can't look after them, I can't own. Like just straight out. And that's the reason we've gone down our. And also I have the long-term vision on the farm. I'd have to tell you, around here, I don't like to see dust blowing. Like if I see dust blowing, that's a bad thing for me. And so for one of our critical things was keeping ground cover. Once you lose that ground cover, once she starts blowing, it takes a long time. But it is the country is unbelievably resilient. Like even country around here that was blowing, really badly blowing, It's been cropped now and it's back to looking fantastic. You'd hardly know that it has gone through that process. But longer term, I think that's really important. And again, I just have to tell you that really is that long-term planning is the other essential thing. Understanding what are the important things for around here. It's water. Like that is the absolute critical key. If you run out of water or water starts getting you stressed, you're knackered. You really are going to struggle because then you're going to have to deal with that issue on top of the drought. Like that's on top of the drought. So getting that, understanding what the key drivers are and doing that. And again, understanding what your key drivers are. Sorry to bore you, I'm a bit rambling here, but in my business, I'd have to tell you, like I had a light bulb moment. Went to a seminar talking about EBVs the other day. And they said, what do you select for? I said, 600-day weight. That's what I select for. I just want them big. That's just what I like. And they said, what's your principal profit driver? I said, I'll get him a cowsing calf, live calf on the ground. And they just said, mate, you're selecting for the wrong thing. You're going to have them. And I said, how big are your cows? I said, oh, yeah, buddy, they're huge. And they said, well, you're missing a key profit driver. And so that was a light bulb moment for me, is going back to it, understanding what is your core principle of your business, which for me is keeping cattle and having as many calves as I can.
Yep.
And so, look, again, long-term planning, making sure your water infrastructure is right, your storage of grain and that sort of stuff. But I'd have to tell you, sorry, rambling a bit, but you can't have enough grain and you can't have enough hay. Like there were guys around here, they just kept, like as soon as it started getting dry, they didn't sell any stock, they just started feeding them. Well, they chewed through all their food, all their hay, all their grain and got halfway through. And then what do? They've got all their stock still on. They've got no food. They've got to buy it all and their place looks terrible.
Yeah.
They're in a world of pain, to be honest. Risk management, that's what it comes down to. Really important about that. If you're prepared to risk it, great. Understand what your business are. If you don't like risk, like me, I'm completely abhorrent to risk. I just don't like it. So I just don't expose myself there. Sure, I don't take advantage of the system when it works, but I don't get exposed to that up and down as much. So, yeah. And the other thing is, don't underestimate yourself. That's a really important one. Don't get down on yourself. Make some decisions. And a decision is so much better than no decision. That's the thing that I thought, I'd have to say that I saw around here that was really, really, I'd hope people can improve on, is the fact that they just threw up their hands and said, oh, there's nothing I can do. It's not raining. There's nothing I can do. Mate, that's wrong. Of course, there's things you can do. You've got to make a decision and understand that you can only you can make a decision, but judged on what's available today. There's no point saying, oh, I should have done this and I should have done that. No. If you looked at the situation, made the best decision at the time, move on. And that's really important. So having that confidence that you will make the right decision for yourself. Don't worry about what your neighbours do. Don't worry what anyone else does. Worry about what you do. And if it's good for you, good for you. And keep going. And I'd have to keep saying is just keep going at it. Have that plan and keep at it, because you will amaze yourself about how you keep going. And I won't bore you. Like during the middle of the drought, I had a tree fall on me, break my leg. Yeah, so went to hospital. They said, no, X-ray department's closed. Come back tomorrow. Here's a Panadol and some crutches. That night fainted, took me in, X-rayed my leg, broken. Right. Well, 2 weeks later, I'm feeding my cows again because I had to. Now, it is amazing what you can do if you have to. And people shouldn't underestimate what they can achieve when the pressure's on. So look, that's the key thing. And stay positive, because ag is so good. Like fair income, ag is so good at the moment. But there's more of us. We want better food. What's going to happen? I just think it's fantastic. I just think the drought is a part of our business, and just see it as you might say, an opportunity to sharpen your tool and be better than other people at it, and you'll come out on top. Like, I just think it's fantastic at the moment.
And so, Angus, and so just that's exactly it. And you were talking about that preparation for in and out of drought, and the planning that goes into that, and owning and knowing your own decision making within the framework of your business, as you're talking about, is really essential, is what I'm hearing.
Yeah, Matt, the only thing for me, what I will do, so we used to be all breeders. We just run cows. That's what we used to do. I'm getting away from that now. What I'm going to have is a more balanced. I'll buy trade in cattle when I can. When the opportunity goes, when I've got feed, when I look like I'm going to have a good crop, I'll do that and run a few less breeders. So then when things do start to go south, I can just immediately get rid of 20% of my DSEs, because I can just sell my steers. I can just piss them off, focus back on my core breeders, And so that's the change that I have made. Fantastic. For sure. And also, again, being more focused on unproductive cows. Like I'd say, I'll give her another chance. Nah, if she doesn't have a calf, she makes a carcass, either herself or her progeny. And you've got to be really strict with that, because it is about running the productive cattle and rewarding the cattle that perform for you. Not saying, she's nice, she looks great, she had a nice calf 2 years ago, I'll keep her. No. Yeah. You got to be hard.
Fantastic. Thanks, Angus, and I love your passion. Thanks for sharing that with us. And Tegan, I'm going to come and introduce you in a minute, but thanks for joining us. Anika, can you talk to us about your experience with drought?
Yeah, sure. So I spent a fair bit of my childhood in Melbourne, and my parents purchased our farm in far western New South Wales when I was 12 years old. And I remember the first trips out here, I just fell in love with this place, the number of kangaroos, finding emu nests hidden amongst the rocky hills, a lot of greenery. But we did buy in the year 2000. And so pretty much the first 10 years, we had little to no rainfall. The millennium drought was pretty harsh out here. And that really sort of opened my eyes and my understanding to what actually a drought is. And I really saw firsthand how interconnected people are with the natural world. Watching the farmers in the area truck off their livestock, seeing people leaving the rural town over the years as they got progressively worse. Also feeling that, that toll personally, that worry of, this land, as it's suffering before my eyes. And I think, you do a lot of questioning, sort of self-reflection during a drought. What should I have done? I wish I had done something sooner, whether it's removing livestock or having better business diversification. So one really sort of has a lot of reflection time while we spend time staring at the sky also. And I think what I sort of really learned during those dry times was that the importance to listen and learn from the land, to really lean in close and observe what is there and what isn't there, and how can one, look after the health of this place that we are so honored to, be connected with and working and living alongside of. So something that now myself and my family are much more involved with is citizen science projects, like recording frog, bird, plant species that we find, and actually recording, the abundance and diversification of plant and animal species. And I think probably our main focus now is actually building up and looking after biodiversity and, making sure that we have proper ecosystem health. And when we have that and the good seasonal conditions, then we have the privilege of being able to grow food from the land. Looking forward, because I'm very much involved in the science sphere too, I spend a lot of time looking at projections of where we are going. And when I look at the projection for far western New South Wales, one can feel very concerned about it. By 2050, I'll be the average age of an Australian farmer, and the projections are we'll have 33% less rainfall, we'll have 2 months of the year over 40 degrees. And as someone who dreams of being a farmer and having a career in this area, one has to be proactive to these changes that are occurring, really recognizing what the science is saying about the world. So we're not just being reactive and trying to, catch up and look after ourselves when the bad times come, but learning how do we prepare for challenging conditions, and most importantly, what can we do now to actually shift that trajectory so we avoid those challenging conditions, so we minimize risks, prevent droughts from getting more frequent and more intense, which is currently forecasted with the way that we are going. So that's really my reflections and experiences from the drought.
Yeah, thanks, Anika. I just like the way those three conversations are starting to connect and fold into each other. We'll come back to that, Anika. I want to come back to that point you've raised about when you look at figures like that, 33% less rainfall and higher temperatures and these sorts of things. And I want to come back to you because I want to understand in your community whether that's sort of overwhelming or there's a sense of, individuals, going back to Angus's point, you've got to know your own business and how you're going to manage things, but also looking outside of that and starting to think to yourself, how is there a way we can work together to face those sort of challenges? So I'll come back to that, but I just want to go to Tegan from up in Queensland. Tegan, why don't you introduce yourself and just give us a little bit of background in terms of your experience with drought where you are.
Well, hi, Matt. Hi, everybody. Thanks for having me. As Matt said, I'm from North Queensland, just outside of Charters Towers. We're on a cattle property here on the beautiful Burdekin River. So it's my husband's family business that I've been involved in for the last creeping up to 14 years, I think. Sorry, excuse me. So probably the first 7 years of me living here and working in the business was some of the really driest times that I've seen or my husband has seen. There were very difficult years for a number of reasons, but most definitely the environmental challenges were huge around that time. We had very light seasons from 2013 to 2016, most definitely were really challenging. Sorry, I've got a tickle. And our district from then on through to 2018 was really challenged as well. So one of the best ways that I found that I could have a little bit of control when I felt like I had no control was to control our language in the household a little bit. I think Erin thought I was completely insane, but I banned the word drought from the house for a little while. And that was purely because we were clearly in an environmental drought, but it felt like, well, we were also heading for a financial drought, but it was an emotional, physical, mental health drought as well. And that was really damaging on all fronts, as we all know drought is. So it wasn't so much a matter of me denying reality, but just having to have some parameters around what we were focusing on, and that was what we could control within our lives. So it wasn't every day looking to the skies for it to rain. We were looking inwards and saying, what can we control today? Like, what can we do now, and what are we going to do in the future so this never happens to this severity again. And that was so helpful for me, because I felt like I had a little bit of detachment from this thing that was going to happen regardless of whether or not I participated. So poor Aaron, my husband, I think I was trying to support him as much as I could, but also encouraging that this is happening, but what can we do about it? So I do feel much more confident about our next run of dry seasons because they're always going to happen. It's a part of our lives. And as Anika has touched on beautifully, it's likely to become more and more severe as we move ahead. So that has changed some of our business decisions. It's been a long-term plan to buy another breeder block in Western Queensland, but when we sat back and looked at the projections for rainfall and for our capacity to deal with that financial stress, and what we really felt about the environmental future for that particular district that we were looking in, we decided that we couldn't take that risk. We have spent so much time and money in capacity building on our property alone, and really adapting to our unique environment. And I just feel so much better going ahead that we have a lot more elasticity of thought, but also management, that we can deal with that a lot better, at least for the next 10 years. We might have to take stock again and see what way we are heading in the future after that. But that was something that I did. Aaron thought I was a little bit crazy, but it really helped me get through those particularly horrible times. So that was it. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thanks, Tegan, and thanks everyone for your reflections and thoughts there. Look, I found the thread of a lot of what you've all connected on pretty interesting. So one of those, so Tegan just mentioned it, Angus to an extent, with advice from his dad. So some of that's been around what choices do we make about where we are and what we're farming where we are. So I get a sense of from some of you almost around mobility to sort of say, well, things might start to shift and change. What does that mean for our decision making, not just in terms of where we are, but where we might want to be? On the other hand, Anika was talking about, well, listen, this is the situation that's going to be facing Western New South Wales. I want to be here and part of the fabric of this community. And so, what do we start to do? What can we do in the face of that future and likely change? So, a lot of this program, the focus of this program is about building resilience. And we know that's from an individual or individual farm business perspective, right through to an entire community or region. So perhaps if I can gain some reflections from you on this concept around resilience, if we can talk about that briefly, and then how the next part of the conversation will be about, all right, if we've got some thoughts around resilience, then what does it take to start building resilience? And you've started to touch on what it means in your own organisation, or own business, or your own family, and what it looks like beyond there. So, Anika, let's start with you. Just your thoughts when someone says resilience or building resilience. What's top of mind for you?
I think it's about being adaptable and being able to move when the goalposts move. I think it's also to do with sort of having that mental and moral strength to, step away when you need to, because, droughts can be incredibly overwhelming, suffocating at times. And sometimes, you need to actually just step back and get away from it and look after your mental health first. As they say, when you get on a plane, like apply your oxygen mask first before you can help others. And we really need to do that. For me, it's also recognizing what gives me energy and what takes away my energy, sort of what recharges my battery and what doesn't, and being very aware of that. And I recognize like some articles, some, places of communication really drain my batteries. I start to feel very overwhelmed, upset at the world. Whereas other places, people, organizations, they really fill me with energy and hope and optimism. And then I can sit at the computer and write an article and do the work that I need to do. So it's being very conscious of those energy levels and gravitating towards what is good for me and trying to lessen what is not so good for me in my life.
Fantastic. Thanks, Anika, for that reflection. Simon, we're going to zoom back across to WA. And I love that your own background, the experience from a city background to being on the farm. But when you hear that term resilience, what does it strike for you?
Yeah, so actually growing up in the city, my context of resilience was probably quite different to Cindy's. She grew up on the farm, so she was sort of experiencing and learning the day-to-day sort of variation or variability in farming. And also going to boarding school. We've got 2 kids at boarding school as well. I think that probably helps build some level of resilience at an early age. You know, but we've got this new normal with climate, which I think is testing some of those concepts now. In terms of my resilience, it's probably through this lived experience of 18 years of farming, and it's my ability to bounce back. It's through experience, but also being involved and being informed, making informed decisions with my peer group, whether they're local farmers in our local community or more broadly across the industry. I think that's really important, not to isolate yourself. That's a real risk in farming. We are interdependent in the industry and recognising that. Yeah, so, and relationships are critical, whether they're professional relationships or within your own family. We always felt we had choice. Like if the succession wasn't working out, we were both educated and we didn't want to go to the extent where it was detrimental to the family relationships, because it's really important to have that support around you. So yeah, I've always been really proactive. Like when we had the 2010 drought, which was 30% drier than any other year we'd had, I threw myself into this program called the Climate Champion Program, which was a national program interacting with other farmers from around Australia. It was meant to be focused on climate variability, but we soon learnt we're all talking about climate change. And that experience over 4 years has been a network I can draw on, and that helps the resilience. I think you're empowered by those sorts of programs.
Great, Simon, thank you for that. Tegan, I'm going to zoom back to you. And just to talk about your reflections on resilience and what it means in your context.
Matt, resilience for me means that I can withstand whatever life is going to throw at me. Now, that is a very different context when you're living out in the bush, because you can all of a sudden isolate yourself, whether you mean to or not. You're not only geographically isolated, but if you're not very good on social media or just picking up the phone like me, I'm terrible for all of those things. You can feel like you are very separate from the rest of the world, and that's just not the case. So it's something that it helps me enormously, is to just be really proactively involved in our community. So that has happened quite naturally in the past few years, but I know I get so much more out of volunteer roles or just community events when I put my hand up to be a part of that. So as Simon and Anika were indicating, it's whatever fills your bucket up for me, that makes me feel like I can withstand whatever's coming our way. And in our partnership sense, that also fills the bucket up for the household, because if the main home provider, I teach the kids here, raise the kids here, and Aaron is our main man in the business, we're a team. If one of us is off, the whole household is off, and it can just so quickly turn into an irretrievable situation when you lose perspective on where you are in life. So for me, being resilient is about consciously making choices that mean that I'm able to meaningfully contribute to our business, and on a personal level that I'm happy enough to be doing that and contributing back to our local community. It all kind of snowballs into one. But for me, that's where it's at.
Fantastic, Tegan. Thanks for those, for sharing those reflections. And Angus, you started to launch into some of this area first time around in terms of, I guess, some of those things that are behind you when you're considering resilience. But just talk to us a bit more about what that means to you and what what your reflections on resilience look like.
Thanks, Matt. I'd have to say, like, a lot of it is building people around you that are positive, to be honest, and truly moving away from victims, like playing yourself as a victim. Oh, there's nothing I can do. It's the drought's fault. The reason my cows are dying is because it's a drought. No. The reason they're dying is because you haven't sold them or you haven't fed them. Forget the drought, like they're dying because you haven't made a decision. And resilience to me is really getting a few people around you that are positive, getting that, making decisions. So, and also having those, I just say, like, something that's really funny. It's challenging for me because I was a bit skeptical of it at the time. They'd organise dinners for the locals around here, we'd all together. And the beauty, I'd have to tell you, the beauty of that was, though, that you sat down and you had a meal and discussed shop. Yeah, you were discussing shop, but it did give you appreciation that everyone was going through this stuff. And you weren't Pat Malone. You weren't the only other guy in the room, struggling with this, doing this sort of stuff. And so having those relationships is really, really critical, I'd have to tell you. But that resilience, it's a tough one. It's one that I struggle with in relation to what makes people have that capacity. Like, again, I watch my neighbours and think, wow, how can they do that? How can they just keep on fronting up, which to me would be completely insurmountable? I'd be saying, mate, they owe so much money. How can they just keep doing what they're doing? And I'd have to tell you, I do struggle with that. It's a question that I do try to tag out of them because, again, I go back to my early comments, because I'm so risk averse. Me compared to a lot of my contemporaries is just chalk and cheese. They owe millions, and they can still battle on. Me, I'd be in a heap. I couldn't do that. And so that's where, yes, like I say, that resilience is. And again, being in the industry, if you don't like this job, like if you're not resilient in agriculture, mate, this is not a job you should be in. To be put it as frankly as that, because these challenges are going to happen and bad things are going to happen every day. Like they just do, because that's the industry we work on. And understanding that and accepting that if you don't like that, don't do this job, because there is risk and reward in this job. It's like I've got heifers calving at the moment. It's fantastic. You just go out there one morning and, you'll see a new live calf and you'll watch one have a calf. You think, wow, what a fabulous part of nature. And on Sunday, I was watching one and struggled for an hour, kept my hands off, and eventually I had a dead calf. I pulled a dead calf out and she got up eventually. But you've got to be able to deal with that. Say, right, I've done what I could, which is exactly what I've done, and move on from there. And having that resilience is really important, and having those good, positive relationships. I'll go back to it. And one of the keys for me is, I'll go back to it, is a money and water business, is maintaining your contacting relationship with your financial institution is really, really important. Keeping that discussion open with them so they know where you're at, because if you're talking to them, that's okay, that you're talking with them. But if they don't hear from you, that's not a good thing, because they don't know what's going on. And so that's another relationship which some people don't, not ignore, but don't understand how critically important it is to maintain that really good relationship with your financier, just so they know where you're going and make sure you're on track.
Great, Angus. And I love that, that the focus on, you've all talked about various relationships has been important to maintaining that resilience that you might hold. If we hover up now and we think about resilience in a broader context, so we talked about personal resilience and even your own business resilience and what that means to you and what it looks like in currently and in the future. Part of the work we're doing, of course, is about building resilience more broadly in communities and regions. If you start to look outside yourself in your own business, and we're looking at this term of resilience, I can understand any of you in the middle of drought. It's a really difficult time to be thinking about outside yourself and outside your own business and saying, well, how am I going to contribute to something beyond myself when I'm struggling here to do what I'm doing? I guess the flip side of that is and probably for most of Australia at the moment, we're in a period where conditions are relatively pretty good, opposed to previous years. So, so Anika talked about resilience really in the context of how adaptable you can be in the face of change, which is really what it's about. One thing that gets me, I've got to admit, that a lot of people talk about resilience in terms of bouncing back. What's your ability to bounce back? Now, I personally think that's a bit limiting. I like to think also about bouncing forward. In other words, does it always mean that after drought we can go back exactly to where we were before, or are there opportunities to do something different and bounce forward, so to speak? So I guess with that in mind, I'd like to understand your reflections about how you start to play a part in building resilience beyond yourself and your own business. So if you go outwards to your immediate local community, family and friends, and maybe even to your region. So Tegan, I'm going to start. We're going to put you on the spot with this one. So what does that start to look like? How could you play a role? What things do we need to consider?
Right, thanks, Matt. Look, our little community is so important for our business, but it's a huge area of Queensland that it's the main hub for. And it's very basically, it's things like supporting your local businesses, because if they're gone, the town is gone, and then it's another 2 hours to our nearest. That's only 2 hours for us, and we're considered urban. It services properties 10 to 12 hours away, and it's such a major cultural, social hub for regional Queensland. For me, I'm always inclined to be involved in volunteer positions where I can feasibly be of any use to anybody, because I don't want to take them on if I can't do them well. But just having someone to put up their hand and say, sure, I'll apply for that sports grant, or I'll be the secretary for the ICPA. It honestly starts that social network and the social fabric that allows those natural networking conversations to happen. That's where you say, hey, John down the road he's really doing it tough. Let's get him to town next week, or let's just pop out for a visit, or let's put him in touch with. It's that kind of network leadership, I guess, or network social management that is so important, because it comes from a very genuine place of, we care about the people that live here and we care about the environment here. So how do we give back a little bit more? And in doing so, it fills our buckets, it fills our community. It's just a really wonderful, natural way to have a small amount of influence where you can. So that would be that's my go-to, is to take action where you can, problem solve, educate yourself, but just be aware that if you don't put into the local community, and that can be on a very small level, it can be on a much higher level, it's really where you want to take it. But if you're not willing to be the one to put your hand up or just have those quiet words with the people that need it, it's not going to happen. So that would be where I would start.
Fantastic, Tegan. I love the use of the term, that network leadership approach, because we do believe and see that. So to what extent, you're talking about the extent, and you've all been talking about the extent that you can act in your own circumstance, and even harder but more rewarding across the community, I think, is to what extent can I support others to act as well, beyond self. So yeah, I love hearing that. Thanks, Tegan. Simon, what about you? Again, you're bringing those different experiences to bear on the farm there, and you're thinking about the community and the wider region around you, and what do those contributions in terms of resilience look like for you?
Yeah, I think Tegan captured a really good point there on the social side. So there's different levels here socially. How do we support our local community so that it's not all about farming, it's not all about our business, it's about having a life and giving our kids the opportunity as well. So I've thrown myself into roles where I think I can be useful, whether it's coaching a footy team, being the treasurer of the tennis club or whatever. We all got to pitch in, which has been great for myself as well, because not being from this area, I've been able to develop some relationships on a personal basis. And then from a farming point of view, I had a large focus locally in our grower group, and I did that for quite a few years. And I got to the point where I sort of thought I had to step away and give a younger generation a go, which was hard because I was so invested in it. But now we've got quite a young committee with our local grower group, and it's given them the opportunity to be leaders. So I've sort of broadened my focus now to more industry type issues, and obviously with a climate change focus. And I'm really focused on the fact that we need to keep our conversations open despite the restraining factors such as the politics and things like that. It's really important we have the opportunity for our voice and to share information. So I think that's a key point in resilience as well. So we're learning and making informed decisions as we go.
How do you do that, Simon? How do you, in what could be contentious or difficult environments, create the space that there can be different opinions around around climate, what you're talking about, but still move forward?
I think you've got to keep things as positive as possible in your language, but you've also got to be prepared to take a bit of flack as well. So it does take some courage. But I also think that we're essentially a science-based industry. So if you keep referring back to the science and the trusted experts, it's a good way to go as well, and remind our folk that, say, climate science, for example, has been the sibling of agriculture science since farming began. Just these sort of, we can't forget these sort of things.
Great, Simon. Angus, I'm going to come back to you. So you've given us a really healthy picture of what it looks like in terms of your world, yourself, your farm and your business. When we're talking about building resilience outside that, around the Coonabarabran community or more broadly, what does that look like, and what sort of contributions will it take to build that sort of resilience at a more community or regional level?
Sorry, man, I was just giving you some in-depth thought. Just some other part that, again, off to a degree. One of the things that I think personally that builds resilience, in my opinion, particularly when it was dry, is personal communication, which really always frustrated me. I'd have to tell you, you'd get all these emails, you'd see all the tweets, you'd get all this internet that's all on the web pages, all this sort of stuff. No bastard in you and say, "Oh, g'day, Angus, how you going?" No one. They'd say, "Oh, no, that costs too much." And you're sitting there going, "But how much are you spending on all the employees to do all this other social media work when you're not asking the old mate how he's getting on?" Because it's that one phone call. I'd have to tell you, like the 5-minute phone, I get surveyed reasonably regularly by MLA and all these other sods because I'm wherever I am. But because they ring me up, if they send me an electronic version, yeah, the delete button's the only button on my keyboard that's worn out because I just delete it. If they ring me up and if they're prepared to put a bit of investment of time into me, I'm prepared to put a bit of investment in time into them. And I think that personal communication is something that I think really needs to be seriously looked at. So when things do turn, not bad, but when things are pretty crook and people are struggling, that personal communication is really, really important. And I think it's funny, it's only, I shouldn't say it, but it's a triple bottom line for yourself. You've got to look at the finances, the environment, and the social. And it's really important to get that balance right on my business, because I'm always saying, "Oh, the bloody government doesn't look at the social. It only ever looks at the environmental stuff. We should look at all the that sort of stuff." And you've got to look at that yourself as well and say, righto, financially, I'd have to say, like I've been thinking about in the last 15, 20 minutes, that resilience, I'd have to tell you, it's the build-up. It's not what you did today it's not what you did yesterday. It's what you've been doing for the last 3 years that makes the difference today. Again, getting back to that idea of making sure that I select my cows because I have calves. Now that I can't do that. I've got to do that every year. So I have a fertile herd. And so when I do need to make some reductions, I can be genuine selecting cattle that are going to keep performing. And so it's not a flash in the pan stuff. And I have to tell you, that's agriculture in a nutshell, to be honest. It's long term. The stuff we do is long term, and you need to understand that if you don't get those long term stuff, if you don't get them right, when that crisis moment happens, it really does go bad because you haven't done that early work beforehand. And that's the absolute key about this stuff is resilience, is understanding that it's not what you're doing today, it's what you did 12 months ago in the last few years to ensure that when the pressure comes on, you do have that capacity to deal with that pressure, because that's what it's all about. It's just dealing with that pressure. And that's what a drought does, obviously. You know, I like to tell you, like when it looks like it does today, which I'd have to say it rarely gets better than this. It's easy, you know, like I walk around thinking, oh, well, I moved the cows to today. It's not, what am I going to feed them? That's when the pressure's on. Hay is $500 a tonne. Cottonseed $700 a tonne. Molasses is $500 a tonne. What am I going to feed them, right? It's those decisions that I made 12 months ago, 18 months ago. They're the ones that are really going to impact my ability to make the decisions now. So getting that stuff is really, really important. And encouraging people to make sure that they do focus on their business is in my mind, how you make people resilient, because then they have the capacity to make those decisions.
Fantastic, Angus. Thank you for that. And Anika, I was interested in your comment before when you were talking about what might be coming in terms of the predictions and how that can appear to an individual and an individual business, let alone thinking about broader communities, in your case, in Western New South Wales. So how do you start that conversation? How do you start drawing those connections between people within those communities to say, well, you know, if we're going to be resilient in the face of future change, that to an extent, we absolutely need to work together, to cooperate, sometimes to collaborate in the face of those changes. Where do you start there? And how do you start drawing those connections?
Yeah, I think it's really listening to people, you know, people both around our kitchen table and within the community, and building up that, you know, that togetherness and friendship, you know, that we are all in this together and we all got to get out of, you know, these drought times together. And that is, you know, the shop people, you know, the school teachers, the farmers, the truck drivers, and extending, you know, compassion far and wide. Something that Farmers for Climate Action was doing during some really dry times, you know, 2018, 2019, was we were running weekly Thursday night Zoom calls, and anyone could log on to Zoom and have a chat or listen. You know, they could vent about the drought, or they could just talk about a family wedding. And it was a really nice way of people who were actually, you know, quite geographically isolated to just catch up and have a yarn. And I think it's so important to actually reach out and form those friendships, as all the other speakers have already mentioned, because we also really need to recognize when people are struggling and not too sure how to work their way out of these drought situations. And also, if we do recognize that they are seriously struggling, like working out personally, well, how can we support them and also encourage them to seek mental health support? And this is still like a stigma that we've got to break down. You know, people should be able to feel like they can put up their hand and say, hey, I do need help. And, you know, during those those bad drought years, like I was getting counseling for my mental health. And we need to even look at what services are available for people in rural communities and make sure that they are adequate. And these are some of the, I guess, opportunities that are presented during drought periods, is actually going, well, what should we be talking about as a community and advocating for? You know, where are our vulnerabilities, and how do we make sure that next drought time, you know, we are not as exposed, we are not as badly affected. And so whether it's being more vocal and advocating, you know, for projects related to water security in your community, or, you know, really engaging with politicians or talking about animal welfare or appropriate mental health services in your communities. Yeah, sort of really leaning into these challenging times and going, okay, well, what can I do at this point in time? Yeah, to make sure that we are not as vulnerable and exposed for next time round also.
Absolutely. Thanks, Anika. Well, we're nearly at time. You've each got about 20 seconds to give your final word on what drought resilience means to you. Simon, I'm going to put you on the spot first up.
Look, I think it's a journey as such, and it's putting yourself in good situations in terms of the information flow, relationships, supportive relationships. I think try not to isolate yourself and having that support network around you, but also understanding the key conditions you're dealing with and the changes that are occurring is really important. And there's a whole lot of technical stuff that you need to be across on as well. And if you don't, if you can't get across all that, reach out and get support and advice information.
Fantastic. Thanks, Simon. Tegan, drought resilience.
Yeah, very similar. First and foremost, it's about having the best environmental management that you can on your own part of the country. That would have to be my first protocol. And then to back that up is to really cement those social relationships that you can, where you can, and be as creative with that as possible, and to work out what it is that fills you up so that you can give back is how I would frame that.
Fantastic. Thank you, Tegan. Angus, your final words.
Thanks, Matt. Look, is stay positive. Surround yourself with positive folk. Don't listen to victimhood. Don't listen to victim statements. Just remain positive. And look at history. Like I just said, look at history. Every time, again, I'm so old. 1982, 2002, oh, we're all buggered. There's going to be no farmers left. We're all ruined. Ruddy, blah, blah. If you listen to the doomsdayers, what happened? Mate, we all just got on with it. Everything, the sun came up, moon goes round. Happy days. I just think you've got to stay really positive and understand, I go back to it, that farming is long-term. It's not days and months. It's bloody well years. And so the idea that, you know, like this decision you make today is going to be the ruin of you. I'm telling you, it ain't. Because it takes you a long, I'd have to tell you, that's the beauty of our farming business. We're a bit like the Titanic. To grow broke, you have to do it for a long time and be outstandingly bad at it, to be honest. So you have time, unless you've put yourself in a really risky situation. And then, yeah, you might struggle. But generally, mate, you've just got to make some decisions. Understand that we're in it for the long term, stay positive and get people around you that are going to back you. Because in the end, if you got those people, you will get through it. Like, it is just amazing how you will get through it. And that's really getting those positive folks around you with that positive messaging. That's the stuff you need to get for sure, I reckon.
Fantastic, Angus. Thank you. And Anika.
Thank you. Difficult going last. And I love Angus's energy. But I would also build on that and say, you know, sometimes you don't feel positive, and, you know, it is okay to feel like crap sometimes too. I think resilience for me too is it's listening and learning from the land. It's drawing strength from it, and also the people who live and work alongside the land too, you know, the people on this call. Fantastic.
Well, thank you, Simon, Anika, Angus, Tegan. Thank you, everyone else, wherever you've been beaming in for joining us in this conversation. I hope you've enjoyed it, taken something from it, and more importantly, to contribute something to it in the future. This is the first in an 8-part series of webinars as part of the Drought Resilience Leaders initiative and program funded by the Commonwealth Government under the Future Drought Fund. We hope you can join some more in the future, and thanks everyone for joining us.
Thank you.